Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We had a very special guest today. I guess Representative Adam Smith. I say Congressman as well. I guess both are technically appropriate.
They are both correct, yes.
Well, can we just get down to one? I don't like the confusion.
You can just call me Adam. It's fine. But
I can't do that. I'm institutionalized by the military. I meet like my we had a babysitter come over the other day, and she's 23, and I kept calling her ma'am, and she was looking at me weird. I'm like, sorry, I just can't help myself. It's just the way it is. You're just gonna have to deal with it. Thank you for coming today. I appreciate your time. Where you said you're in Bellevue today.
Yeah, I'm on the West Coast. I flew home Tuesday, I guess, going back to DC on Tuesday as well. Unpredictable schedule right now with the shutdown, and Speaker Johnson has kept us out of session as we're waiting for that to resolve itself. But I got meetings and other stuff back in DC next week, so I'll be going back no matter what's going on.
Yeah. This isn't going to go out until I think Wednesday next week, so maybe it's resolved by then. But what's your take on that right now? I know a lot of people are concerned, upset, and then a lot more people don't care because it doesn't really affect them. But what's the tone in Washington right now?
Well, first of all, you're right. The majority of people in this country aren't paying any attention to it because the overwhelming majority of people don't pay that close of attention to politics, and it doesn't directly impact their daily lives. Within the bubble of Washington, D.C., it is the obsession right now. Look, we're trying to find a resolution. It's that rare situation where because of the filibuster, you need both Democrat and Republican votes in the Senate to pass this. So we're trying to negotiate something that has something for Republicans, something for Democrats, and people can vote for it. I just think we need to negotiate, sit down, and have that conversation. Right now, Speaker Johnson has said, no, we passed our bill. That's the only thing on the table. It's a continuing resolution. You ought to go ahead and accept it because it's just a clean CR, as the Washington, D.C. cliche goes, which is to say it doesn't change anything that's currently in the budget. But the point is Democrats want to change things that are currently in the budget. So that's kind of what we're fighting over at the moment, and it's pretty important. Main focus is healthcare. Healthcare premiums set to go up when a tax credit expires, but there are other issues that we're trying to resolve.
I'm confused about some things, so I'm gonna get some clarification. Sure. The CR, the phrase "clean CR" is stupid. A clean CR would be a one-page bill, in my opinion, but I think government should be so small that we can barely see it. And you and I probably don't agree on that. But the CR, as it is just a continuation of the Biden budget that the Democrats passed in a couple sessions ago, is it not?
Well, yes and no. No, actually, because the budget for what is fiscal year 26 did not pass until March. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Biden was long gone at that point. So this is a budget that was passed by the Republican Congress and Republican president in March of this year. And then, of course, the budget reconciliation package that passed had a massive impact on that budget. It made substantial cuts to certain programs and also increases to the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense. So no, it's not fair to say that this is Biden's budget. It's not even remotely connected to Biden.
Okay. And then what about the claims? And it's not a claim. I think this is pretty substantiated, though you may not agree that part of this, I think that the Republicans are making this fight about health care expenditures for illegal immigrants. But it's not just about that, but it is partly about that because that is certainly in the bill, and it has been happening. It's always amusing to me to watch these media outlets praise something and then deny it exists 3 years later. It's like the inverse of the Gelman amnesia effect or something like that. But I think it was can't remember if it was the New York Times or the Washington Post that ran a story about what they called undocumented immigrants, which is a ridiculous term in my opinion. Receiving health care benefits, and then obviously suggesting this year that it doesn't exist when it's politically expedient for them to do so. I think for a lot of Republicans, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I'm more, I guess, of a right-leaning independent person. I don't like political parties that much, but a big part of the reason Trump got elected was to deal with this immigration issue that the Biden administration caused, that the Obama administration caused, that the Bush administration before him caused as well. Let's not lay it all on Democrats here, but that was a big referendum, in my opinion, for this election, and continuing to spend taxpayer dollars when we're in teetering on recession and stuff like that over the last couple of years on people that don't belong here in the first place is something that's pretty objectionable for people who voted for Trump, right?
Yeah, there's a number of pieces to that. First of all, what is absolutely true is Joe Biden and the Democrats did not secure the border, did not, and had way too broad a definition of asylum. There's no question
Mm,
about that. I mean, even up here, we were talking about Bellevue. I represent the city of Tukwila.
mm.
There was a church in Tukwila that said, "Hey, bring your illegal immigrants to my community," and we got overrun. And the state of Washington had to do, I think it was like $30 million. King County had to do 6 million just to try to pay for accommodating those folks who showed up. So it is absolutely without dispute that part of the problem with why Democrats didn't do well in the last election was because we didn't secure the border. Now, I happen to think that far left policies in a wide variety of different other areas, we talked a little bit offline about Seattle, our inability to effectively govern the areas that we control because we're not dealing with crime, homelessness, drug abuse, mental health, and housing, because we are governing based on a left-wing ideology that is, well, fundamentally flawed is the biggest understatement that I'm going to offer you this morning. Just completely wrong in terms of how it should. And I say that, by the way. I used to consider myself to be a progressive before that became an entirely different thing.
So did Teddy Roosevelt, my friend.
Exactly. See, when I talk about progressives, I talk about Teddy Roosevelt,
Mm.
I talk about Franklin Roosevelt, I talk about Lyndon Johnson. We're in a different world now, so all of those things definitely combined. We just had this big debate in the city of Seattle whether or not to put a police officer or a school resource officer into Garfield High School. We had a high school student shot dead in the middle of the day last year. Never caught the guy because we also have a law in the state of Washington that says cops can't talk to juveniles without a lawyer present. So we had all the juveniles there and couldn't talk to him. So the guy got away. And there was all this argument about no. So the city of Seattle voted against, sorry, the school board voted against putting resource. So yeah, I'm 100% with you on all of that. Now, fast forward to the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act does specifically say that those benefits are not available for illegal immigrants. It does say that. Now, that doesn't mean that states like mine and others don't find ways in their own healthcare budgets to nonetheless provide those benefits. So putting aside the debate of whether or not they should or should not do that in certain circumstances, the Affordable Care Act says you can't. What states do is different, number one. Number two, the Affordable Care Act covers millions of people. Now, might a few undocumented immigrants or illegal immigrants, depending on how you want to put it, get covered by that? They might, depending on the state and how they handle it. But our failure to extend the tax credit will mean that millions of people will either lose their health insurance or see the costs go up dramatically. So it will have a profound impact on American citizens as well.
Well, will the costs go up more dramatically than they did as a result of the Affordable Care Act? Will people?
Yeah.
I mean, it hasn't been a very good piece of legislation, and I think it's the obvious proof of that is that only 23 million people are participating in it, right?
Yeah, I disagree with you on that. First of all, only 23 million?
23 million out of 350 million citizens is a
Well,
pretty large
yeah, but
minority.
23 million out of, I'm going to have to do the math here, out of the uninsured population. I'll tell you, Washington State, before the Affordable Care Act, 12% of our population was uninsured.
Mm.
Now 4% of our population is uninsured. I mean, I
Have
think
you
that's
do you know anything about the data behind private bankruptcy filings? I know in the middle like 2017, 2018 time period, about 83% of all privately filed bankruptcies were the result of unpaid medical debt, even after the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah.
So I'm
Well, this,
curious. I haven't actually looked into how that's been updated. I haven't seen the latest statistics. I'm curious if you guys track on that.
well, let me say this. The Affordable Care Act did not fix our healthcare system. I would never claim that.
Mm.
We have a healthcare system that is a nightmare to deal with. I know this actually. I went through a personal chronic anxiety, chronic pain thing. I actually wrote a book about it. It was a long battle where I went through the healthcare system trying to figure out what was wrong with me.
Well, what was it?
Took
Was it autoimmune stuff? Because that seems to be the thing
No,
that
no,
gets
no, no, no,
everybody
no,
these
no. I
days.
had well, I had knee surgery when I was
Mm,
15 years old, played soccer, screwed up my knee, and I never rehabbed it.
mm,
So the left side of my body got stronger than the right side of my body because I kept favoring it over and over again. And then my hips got screwed up, and that was a huge nightmare. And then, well, then I was adopted and went through a lot of crap as a child, and I never quite
mm.
sorted out. So that was the anxiety problem. But 3.5 years worth of psychotherapy, all good. Finally found a psychologist who knew what he was doing. But point is, healthcare system has massive problems, and I
Mm.
will completely confess that the Affordable Care Act did not fix all of those problems. It did, however, dramatically reduce the number of uninsured people. Now, we still have a healthcare system that pays for quantity, not for quality. All right. You can order tests, get surgeries. I had a couple hip replacements that I probably didn't need, but it pays. All right. We are not emphasizing primary care.
Mm.
We are not making smart. There's all kinds of things that are wrong with the healthcare system that the Affordable Care Act certainly did not fix. But it did cover 23 million people who otherwise wouldn't have been covered.
Don't you feel like it just put 23 more million people into a sinking ship, though? I mean, it's this is that we're and then the forced compliance part of it was also very problematic for me. But you've outlined just a few of the ways that our healthcare system is broken,
I
and
want to drill down on that forced compliance thing in just a moment, but go
yeah,
ahead.
no, you go.
Yeah, no. Look, I certainly think that there's a lot more that needs to be done in our healthcare system, but the forced compliance thing is an interesting thing because this is part of the burden of being an elected official. We can't give people something for nothing. So this is health insurance. Now, generally, I think people think we want to try to make sure that as many people in this country as possible have access to affordable basic health care. I don't think anyone would say that it's a good society if you've got some, 15, 20% of the population who just can't get health care.
Mm.
I think we would agree that that's problematic. Because it's not necessarily just this 15%. I mean, you lose your job, you have a healthcare incident, all of a sudden you're in trouble. But to say that you can't require people to have insurance, if you don't have everyone covered, then the people who are sick are going to seek care, and the people who aren't. And insurance doesn't work that way. We did this in Washington State. We passed an affordable basic health plan, but we said you can come on and off it whenever you want to. You're not required to be on it. Well, after about a year and a half, people were jumping on whenever they needed it and jumping off whenever they didn't. And I mean, that's like saying, look, I'm going to set up an insurance company and I'm only going to insure people who get in 20
Mm.
accidents a year. You're not going to make it very far.
Sure, yeah, but
So,
I mean, we're is I'm a huge proponent, obviously, of capitalism, but
as a,
you don't have the right to demand that I pay for other people's health care. Okay, you don't. Where in the Constitution is the federal government granted the authority to oversee people's day-to-day health care choices? They're not. I mean, otherwise, the Tenth Amendment has no meaning. The ultimate right
well,
is the property
where
right, and the
where in the
ultimate property is
Constitution
oneself.
does it say that you can't? That you
Well,
can't
that's not how
exercise.
the Constitution works, sir. I'm sure you know that. The Tenth
Well,
Amendment says that. I'm
let me
so,
just
just one second. The Tenth
go ahead.
Amendment says that any authority not granted to the federal government goes back to the states. Now, if the states want to make decisions like that, that's up to them. But the federal government has no constitutional right to do any of that.
No constitutional right to pass a law saying that,
That's correct.
should fund healthcare.
That's correct.
I don't completely agree with that
Well, the Tenth
interpretation.
Amendment agrees with it.
Yeah, but I think healthcare is a public good. And I confess, I did not study the Constitution in great depth before we got on here. I'm more focused on healthcare policy. So yeah, if you want to do it on a state by state basis, that would be fine. But having a whole lot of people in our country who are not insured is a problem,
Yeah,
not
here's
just
here's my.
from
I think Massachusetts actually did it pretty well back in the day.
agreed.
They
Yeah,
achieved single payer. This is before they went fully crazy, which they have now. But and there's
just Mitt Romney, actually. Yeah.
yeah, it was a Republican, of course.
Yeah.
No, just kidding. But it was Mitt Romney that did that, and I think they handled it okay. I still don't. Obviously, there's going to be flaws in any sort of solution that involves more than two people, right? Like an agreement between two people can work. An agreement between three, good luck. That's just how it works.
Amen. That is
But
a great description of how representative democracy is a significant challenge.
sure,
So
it is. Yeah,
I
for sure.
appreciate
Yeah,
that.
but I mean,
Yes.
that's why we use the Constitution as a guidestone. The federal government doesn't have any rights that are not specifically conferred to it. That's how we wrote the documentation of this country for this very reason, because it is very difficult to have even a handful of people agree, much less millions of people agree. The problem doesn't necessarily get solved when you send it back to the state, because still some states have California's got 40 million people. Good luck with that too, right? 40% of them are Republican, and there's 5 congressional seats there, which is a whole other situation, right? I don't think. Well, we can get into that later, but I don't think it's super helpful for everybody to be gerrymandering districts and whatnot. But
I agree.
here's my opinion on
Proportional
healthcare.
representation would make
Yeah,
sense.
it would. It would. Yeah. Here's my opinion on healthcare. I try to encourage people on the right to take people on the left at their best possible meaning when they say we want free healthcare. Not, you mentioned this before. Nothing's free, but I know what
Yeah.
they mean when they say that, and I think if you take them at the interpretation that in the richest country in the history of the world, it probably is unethical to tell people they can be as healthy as they can afford to be when we have the resources to make that not the case, when we have the resources to make sure that everybody has a better chance. I mean, there's nothing more patriotic than taking care of your neighbor, in my opinion. And you can, if you're a religious person, obviously there's religious implications there as well about taking care of your neighbor and such, no matter what religion you're a part of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's unethical for us to look at our neighbors suffering and be okay with that because of our politics. So that's a good starting point. The problem is, how do you solve that? And
Yeah.
private industry is usually better than the government at doing things, but also private industry has given us the largest lawsuits in the history of human beings through the pharmaceutical industry, right? So none of this stuff is particularly foolproof or even close to it. So I'm curious, what would it? I know this is something that you've been pretty involved in healthcare, and one of the other things I want to talk about is military and veteran stuff when we get to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've got a big problem right now where we're kind of operating to the lowest common denominator while allowing the private sector, who should be solving this problem, in my opinion, be predatory towards the consumer.
Yeah. No, look, and I think this is a really helpful conversation. It's fascinating. I'm glad we're able to talk this way, because so much of what I deal with is like partisan one way or the
Mm,
other, as opposed to just taking a step back and saying, we got problems in this country. How do we go about solving them? And I think you described it pretty well. I've always said you need a balance between the public and the private sector.
mm.
I too am a capitalist. My name's Adam Smith. I have no choice in that
Yeah,
regard.
yeah, yeah.
But and I think that's one of the great things about being American is individual initiative is rewarded, and you can go out and solve problems and do great things,
Mm,
and that's terrific. However, Adam Smith also wrote a great deal about how capitalism needs to be regulated.
mm,
He has this great quote that says, whenever two or more business people gather in one place, it is to conspire against the public good.
mm.
So you have to balance that, all
Sure.
right? Because the one thing about capitalism is it disproportionately rewards the winners. It sort of feeds upon itself. You win, you get the resources, you have the power, you can win more, 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 more. How do you balance that out so that you have a fair society? And to my mind, that's what we should be trying to do. Get the benefits of the private sector, individual initiative, soften those edges off by making sure that you adequately provide for others and you regulate. Going back to the Teddy Roosevelt conversation. If trusts get developed, if individual businesses get too much power, they can cut off competition and abuse that power. So it needs to be regulated. That's how I think we ought to approach it.
Yeah, and cutting off competition doesn't just have the financial impact. It has so many downstream impacts as well. One, it consolidates power, which is, it can become
Yeah.
problematic. And then I think the most important part of it is that it kills ingenuity, right? So in the Marxist system, if your boss finds out you've got a good idea, they steal it and kill you, right? But they don't actually understand the idea, so it goes to an 80. This is what China does. China steals our technology at an 80% solution, and then and puts a paint job on it and pretends like they have something. That's why all their stuff sucks. It's why people that work in the NatSec industry, as I did before, are not terribly concerned with China because they're incompetent. In the same way that we've seen Russia with Ukraine, that's what China really is. They're incompetent. But that's what happens on the Marxist side. On the I guess unregulated capitalist side, when you don't have competition in the marketplace, and I'll say even politically here in Texas, for example, it's very red state, right? So all you have to do is have money and run as a Republican. It doesn't actually matter what you believe. You can just run
We've
as a
got the same
Republican.
opposite problem in Washington.
Same.
We don't have
Massachusetts.
competition, and
Yeah.
it is ugly.
Yeah.
Can I
Florida.
give you an example
Yeah.
from
Go
the
ahead.
defense world?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're working on acquisition reform.
Mm,
Basically, how do we introduce more innovation, more competition within
mm.
DoD? And we've consolidated the power down to basically big five defense contractors have a disproportionate amount of
It went
power.
it went from, I believe, 24 under Clinton in the mid 90s to now 5 companies. Same thing
Yeah.
with telecommunications. By the mid Obama time, it went from, I think, 11 to 4. Same situation.
Yeah, but so we're trying to get those innovative new companies in there.
Mm,
But what I've said about the big five is because they get upset and they say, well, we can innovate too. We know how to, and I agree.
mm,
Okay. The thing is that those companies, they are capable of innovating, they're capable of competing. They'd just rather not. Okay. Because if they can just get the contract and hold on to it without competition, but once you force them to compete, once you set up the rules so that some of the newer companies, the Andurils, the
mm,
Palantirs, the Kratoses, Shield AI, a bunch of new companies coming up out there. Mock is a pretty cool company out of Texas, building drones
mm.
and hypersonic missiles. Once you enable then all of a sudden those big five, they'll become capitalists again.
Yep.
They'll compete and they'll come up with innovation. It's great, but you have to force that competition so the capitalism doesn't concentrate that power. And I think, yes, we have that major political problem right now in Washington state. As a Democrat, you know that you don't have to worry about a Republican.
Mm.
So you didn't even think about it. And then, because the loudest voices tend to be heard, the left is very, very loud. So a lot of politicians around here, all they got to do is suck up to the left and they're golden.
Right.
And we've seen the result of that in horrible policies, lack of competition, lack of personal responsibility. I could go on and on and
Mm.
on. So I think we need to introduce more competition into the political system as well.
Yeah. It doesn't matter if it's social, political, or financial. Without competition, things get very dumb very fast. Speaking of that, you're a pretty moderate Democrat. If people don't know, I don't know how many people in my audience are familiar with you, but more or less, you're a pretty moderate dude and have been for some amount of time. You were progressive when it didn't mean all the weird shit that it means today,
That's
but
my way of looking at it.
more
Yes.
more or less moderate now. Why do you think the Democratic position on so much stuff has changed so rapidly and oddly, especially like regarding illegal immigration, for example? You can easily find videos of Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden over the last 20 years or so saying the precise Republican position right now. And
Absolutely.
if you ask someone in where you grew up, well, maybe not in Tacoma so much, but in the Seattle area. Tacoma's got a lot of military people, but in the
Yeah.
Seattle area, if you ask them, well, that's going to be a racist answer, right? Well, how could
Yeah.
it be? I just why what do you you've been involved in politics for a while. How did that happen so
Yeah, I
rapidly?
have an answer for
Mm,
that. I think, well, two things happened. One, I think, is a small part of it. I think that the concentration of wealth in our country and the economic struggles that people have experienced. I mentioned earlier, I grew up in SeaTac, blue collar family. My father worked at SeaTac Airport as a baggage handler, union job, and we struggled, but we could make it. All right, now housing's so much more expensive. Education, my God, how much more expensive education is than when I went through the system. It's unbelievable. And I think that put a lot of economic pressure on people, and it encouraged people to have a more populist bent. But that's a small piece of it. The larger piece of it is a very concentrated effort by folks with a very specific left-wing ideology to spread that ideology. Now, I already got in trouble for this once, so I'll go ahead and get in trouble again. I read Christopher Rufo's book.
Mm.
I'm forgetting the name of it off the top of my head. America's Counter Revolution. How the left came to dominate everything. And I used to joke even before I read Rufo's book. And let me just be perfectly clear with your audience. I do not agree with Christopher Rufo's take on how we should handle race relations or a wide variety of different other things. But I always used to refer to it as the revenge of the 60s burnouts. So basically, all the people in the 60s who ultimately lost the effort to move us radically to the left in the 70s and 80s, they went to ground, basically. And they went to our higher education institutions and other places, and they started pitching this very specific ideology of oppression and anti-capitalism, and they spread it. And I describe it this way. So I mentioned I grew up in I was interested in politics at a very young age. My father started taking me to union meetings and everything, and I just got interested. So 12, 13 years old, I'm starting to work on campaigns. Back then, it was more a matter of here's how you get involved in politics. It wasn't overwhelmingly ideological. Yeah, I was a union guy, so I stood up for union stuff. But by and large, I was just learning about policy and politics. Now, if you're growing up in Seattle, if you're Adam Smith, instead of the early 1980s and the early 2000s, you're being indoctrinated in an activist culture. You're being taught to be an activist for a very specific ideology that has all kinds of tentacles in different directions about oppression and identity politics and all of that. That is how those folks are being educated. And they have become very loud and very aggressive. I can tell you, I can't hold town hall meetings in my district anymore because the left shows up and screams at me. I do telephone town halls now, so I did one last night. And I've been doing town hall meetings for a long time. And as I tell people, I've pissed off a lot of people over the course of a 36-year career. I've had tough town hall meetings before. I had a whole bunch of town hall meetings around that healthcare issue we were talking about before. I have never not been able to keep those things under control until now, until the left has decided that because I'm not a 100% adherent, my voice does not need to be heard. So we began to educate people in that ideology, and then they spread out. I've got this long-term battle with King County government, and oh yeah, that does not govern very effectively. And I've been arguing with them for a long time. And I will go to them. Let's talk about criminal justice policy. And I said, look, the problem is your official policy is abolition of the criminal justice system. And the King County, oh no, no, it's not. I said, well, the head of your alternatives program is an abolitionist. The head of your police oversight policy is an abolitionist. You have a policy within King County called the Care and Closure Commission, whose sole job it is to shut down the criminal justice system. So how is it that you say abolition is not your policy? It is your policy. All right. So in the depths of the Democratic Party, in the depths of Democratic run governments, you have very extreme leftists. Even if they're not the elected official, and many times they are, the staff is pushing us in that direction on these issues. Now, let me just say, again, I'm a progressive, so I don't disagree with the fact that racism, bigotry, sexism, I think those things are problems, and I think we ought to deal with them. Just not the way they're talking about dealing with them. And I sure as hell don't agree with the notion that every single white person walking the face of the earth is a racist. Okay? So I want to deal with them, but no, you must adhere to their very specific way of looking at all these issues, or you will be cast out. And then, sorry, I've gone on a long time here, but the final thing that happens is even if you're in one of these environments, King County government or Washington State legislature or wherever, and you're a Democrat who doesn't agree with that stuff, you don't dare speak up, okay? Because you will be aggressively attacked. And even if you're not driven out, it's just a pain in the ass, all right? And you don't want to deal with it. And furthermore, you know that if you just keep quiet, you're going to be fine. And one of the other things we've done, thank you, COVID, is now we don't even require people to come into the office. All right. So you're a staffer in one of these places and you're getting paid six figures to basically not show up. And you're supposed to challenge that so that people can yell and scream at you and you maybe lose your cushy position. That's the problem. That's the best way I can describe it. And I
Yeah.
am doing what I can. Even if I don't agree with you on healthcare, I do agree with you that the left has become a problem in governing in places that Democrats control. And if we want to beat Trump, I tell Democrats all the time, you want to beat Trump, you goddamn well better you better fix that. Okay? They don't want to fix that. They just want to say Trump's awful, Trump's terrible, we got to get rid of him, but we're not going to change anything that we do. And that's not going to work, in my opinion.
Well, that's the easier way to handle it, but it's not effective. Yeah, a lot of people ask me, um, why don't or when is Adam going to become a Republican or Fetterman going to become a Republican? Never. And one, not only is that not going to happen, we don't need Republicans who disagree with Republican positions. We need a healed Democratic Party, right? And there's
I'd say the same thing about the Republican Party.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, there's
Yeah.
plenty of issues over there too. I mean, they're going in a different direction. I mean, right now, there's a big bend towards collectivism on both sides of
Yeah.
our political system, and it's complete nonsense. Collectivism is stupid. We treat people as individuals in this country. That is the thing that makes us unique in the world. We were the first people ever to put that on paper and live it. And then from the Marxist side, I talk about this a lot. The goal usually is to weaponize one or more minority communities against the majority, start a revolution, ride that wave into power, and as the state manage that power, which is just a backdoor into authoritarianism. And from the fascist worldview, it's we're having problems, so let's get the majority to blame some minority group or another, and then implement authoritarian measures to control those groups. And now we have complete power as well. It is the complete horseshoe, and both.
That is an awesome definition
Yeah,
of the
both
problem.
both examples are fucking stupid in my opinion. Well, that's not my opinion. I think that's an absolute fact. Those are stupid because history tells us that these things are stupid. They don't work. We talked about China before. It isn't just about the authoritarianism itself, and we mentioned this with business as well. It's about the stupid second and third order effects. For example, Mao didn't like sparrows. So he had them all killed, and then all the rodents and bugs that they ate killed all the plants. Most of the people that died during the Cultural Revolution weren't from murder. They were from incompetence during a famine,
Oh, yeah.
right? That's the kind of stupidity that's bred from authoritarianism. We need a free marketplace of ideas to make things work. Now, you were one of the members of, I can't remember what the group was, it the New Democrats or the Centrist Democrats back in the
They're
day.
called the New Democrats.
Yeah.
I was there basically when they were founded back in the mid 90s
Yeah.
when I first got elected to
And
Congress.
now there's another push with this group called Majority Democrats. One of my buddies, I don't know, I'm sure you're familiar with him, Jake Auchincloss from Massachusetts,
Yeah,
is the chair
it's
of it
great.
right now.
Yeah, talk to him all the time.
Another, like he and I disagree on a lot of stuff, agree on probably 50 to 70% of stuff, like normal human beings do. But he's a solid Democrat. We disagree on most stuff that's objection between the parties. But he's a normal dude, just a normal guy that's like, well, I think this. And I'm like, well, I think this. I'm like, okay, well, let's figure out a way to fix that problem that we're both identifying from different angles. Let's do that. He's a guy you can have a conversation with. Majority Democrats is trying to bring that back because
Yeah.
I don't know if a lot of people that are listening to this aren't old enough to remember, but the Clinton administration was pretty good. Let's be real about that, right? We had economic surpluses. We weren't doing too much dumb shit. We probably shouldn't have been involved in bombing Iraq. We probably should have taken Osama bin Laden into custody in '96 and put him in prison for the rest of his life. But look, mistakes happen sometimes.
Nobody's perfect.
Yeah,
Yes.
nobody's perfect, but I think it went pretty well. And it was a result of Republicans doing what they're supposed to do, which is be very Republican, and the Democrats doing what they're supposed to do and be very Democratic, right? The New Democrats did a really good job. I didn't like a lot of the rhetoric from Newt Gingrich, the family first, when they turned the word liberal into a pejorative term. I thought that was it was effective at the time, but look at where we are now. If you tell, it's the same thing that's happening from the right at this point. The far left has been calling them evil, fascist, racist for so long that some of these people are saying, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to be fascist and
Yeah.
racist. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And the same thing happened, I think, to some degree. You mentioned the burnouts from the '60s coming back into power. I think that was a big part of it. I think being gaslit during the '90s that liberalism is somehow makes you crazy when classical
Both of
liberalism
those
is
sides are dependent on each other.
yeah.
They feed off of each other because the rational conversation in the middle, they say, well, we can't have that rational
Mm,
conversation because look at how crazy these people are. But you said something really important in terms of how this is supposed to work. And what both of these extremes have done is they don't want to have a rational conversation. That is why they don't show up at my town hall meetings and ask me tough questions. And they could, by the way. And look, there's 1,000 different subjects out there. You can catch me in a tough question. As often as I've done this, it's a complicated world. I'm going to miss some things from time to time. No, they show up and they scream at anyone who tries to speak up who disagrees with them because they want to silence the
mm,
opposition. They don't want to have the debate. They want to try to win an argument. They want to force you into believing this. I always remember something. I went to Fordham University, actually, undergrad. Um, and I took a class from a professor, conservative Jesuit, on Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke, sort of the father of conservatism
mm,
out of Great Britain. And we were talking about abortion, and this guy was very, very pro-life. And he said the worst thing that we ever did in this country was allowed a public debate about whether or not abortion should be legal. And when he said that, my young liberal mind was like, my God, debate is always good. It's always positive. What is he talking about? And then I thought about it in the months, years afterwards. He was kind of right from his perspective. If your most important thing was no, abortion must remain illegal, then if you can stop people from even thinking about an alternative, then you've won before the game has even been played. All right. So that's one sort of totalitarian way of looking at the world. But to your point, what's great about America is we don't do that shit.
mm.
Okay. Let's go. Well, let's have a conversation. You think that, I think this. Let's have it out. Let's talk about it. Let's see who's right, who's wrong,
Mm,
and let's grow and develop our ideas. That's what America is supposed to be about.
mm,
But now we got both right and left saying, no, I'm right. My job is not to have a debate. My job is not to figure out what the answer is. I know the answer. My job is to force that answer down your throat in order to save the republic.
sure.
When we should be having debate and discussion and argument. I
Yeah.
learn something every time I have a conversation.
Mm.
And we're moving away from that and towards this totalitarian approach.
Yeah, it's that's another one of those two-way streets too. If you listen to Ruth Bader Ginsburg's opinions on Roe v. Wade, for example, she often intimated that it was a mistake, not the ruling itself, but the fact that a ruling was made because the states were already making that decision on their own, and they were all coming to the same conclusion, which is the most common conclusion on earth in Western countries, by the way, which is 15 weeks at the time, at least. That was the most common thing. Most of Europe is like that, which is funny because whenever we have the abortion debate and Europe calls us crazy right-wing fascist people, but they have the same exact law that we do, which is odd, but Europe doesn't know what they're doing. But yeah, forcing the issue when it was being taken care of by the public discourse was a mistake. And trying to shut down discourse in general is always a mistake. Anybody that tries to get between you and another person and tell you how to feel about that other person is full of shit, and they're trying to manipulate you, right? If somebody's trying to divide you, they're trying to conquer you. That's where the phrase comes from. And that shit cannot be allowed because for a number of reasons. One, I need you to explain your full position to me so that I can understand that it isn't coming from somewhere evil. You care about people and want them to be taken care of because it's your country. That's a patriotic intent. So I'm not going to be mad at you for feeling that way. How could I? And then the other part is it's a lot more difficult to hate up close. It's really easy when you're shouting from across the water to be angry with each other. It's like that meme of the video of the two dogs growling at each other on the other side of the fence, and then you open the gate and they start licking each other's faces. Then you close the fence again and they start growling again. This is bullshit. We're like e pluribus unum here is how we do things. We're going to disagree, and some people are assholes, and you got to deal with them. That's just the way it is. But for the most part, people just want to like live their lives watch football on Saturday and Sunday, and be left alone, right? That's what most people want. And if we can't have the discourse, then, as you say, the loudest people in the room will say the dumbest possible shit. And if you don't participate, I think it was, is it Plato who says if you refuse to take part in your own governance, you're doomed to be ruled by fools. And that is precisely the case we're in right now. It's not our best and brightest always that are involved in the public discourse anymore.
Well, and that's always what you just said has always sort of been my political philosophy. Having grown up where I grew up, and my friends, that I grew up with, none of them are political. Okay, they went to work for Boeing, they went to work for UPS. The blue collar kids that I grew up with. And I looked at those lives, and I had a complicated childhood. My family had issues, but I had really good friends. And so I value that. Those are the people that I really think about that I go to represent. One of their fathers just passed away a couple of weeks ago, and I went to a memorial service and was really reminded of that as I listened to them talk. And I think about those people as basically they just want to get through the day, just as you just described. All right. And if they can just get through the day, it's a beautiful fucking thing. All right. It's life. Now, there's sad parts about it. Bad things happen, but you got friends, you got family, you get the things you're passionate about in life. I'm passionate about sports, right? I'm going to Game 5 for the Mariners tonight.
Oh, nice.
And I'm just sure they're going to fuck it up. But that's a whole different conversation.
Hey, look, they've won a playoff game now.
Yeah, I know.
The first
I know.
one since, 2001?
2001.
Yeah.
So, but or maybe you like music, okay, or you like art, or you like your kid, I don't know, is in ballet, and you like going. But in order for all of that to work, civil society has got to hang together. Okay, you can't be worrying that your neighbor is going to show up and shoot you because he's having a bad day. All right, you can't be worrying that there's going to be a civil war in your community. I was in Sarajevo in 1998 as part of a congressional trip. And it really struck me that, they had the Winter Olympics there, like, I don't know, 15 years earlier. And it was this beautiful, beautiful place, and people did. And then everything fell to shit. They had a civil war. When I went through there, it was a bombed out mess. All right. So my job is to make sure that the shit doesn't fall apart so that people can go to their kid's soccer game, so that they can, watch their favorite TV program, so that they can go to their kid's wedding and actually live and enjoy life in a world that is reasonably stable. That's, I don't have any, 10-point ideological solution to all the world's problems. I just want to keep things stable enough so that people can go about their day and live their lives. That's what I'm trying to
I think
do.
operating from first principles is what folks need to get back to, because there's a lot of distractions out there. So from a conservative standpoint, you want small government. Okay, so how do you achieve that? There's no 14-point plan to small government. That's not how things work. Small government occurs when you deal with government at the lowest possible level. The smallest form of government is your family, right? And then the second largest one is your neighborhood, and the third largest is your community. When the government shows up with solutions and nobody has their hand out, well, they have no power there. So if you take care of the problems around you, then things do tend to shrink by nature. So this is something I get in people's ass about this all the time. Don't tell me that you're a conservative unless you're doing conservative shit. Unless you're out there trying to make sure that the people around you in close proximity to you are taking care. Do you know your neighbors' names? Do you know them? Do they know that they can come to you if there's a problem? Is that a thing? Does your local church, and many of them do, but there's some that are problematic, does your local church actually serve the community, or does it serve something else, right? Is it just, look, it's perfectly reasonable to want to just go to a place and fellowship with the people that think like you, but that's not why you get the tax credit. Okay, you get the tax credit because you're supposed to do a public good outside of the church. That's what the law says in 501c3. So are you doing all those things? Because if not, you can't really complain. You know what I mean? If I show up to your house and you're like, man, the landscaping looks like shit here. I'm like, well, did you do any landscaping? Like, no. I'm like, well, then why are you fucking bitching about it? It's your job to do this stuff at the very lowest level. And then from, I think from the left position, there's a lot of the toxic empathy stuff. I know that closing the mental institutions and stuff has had a pretty rough effect on our country.
It's been terrible.
Yeah, and that's something that we need to revisit now. And it started technically with a Democrat, although today JFK would probably be a Republican, just the way things have gone lately. But it started with a Democrat. Reagan put the final nail in it. And it's been an absolute disaster for this country. And
Yeah.
it's all of the down. This is another problem I see in the West in general, but especially in the United States. We tried to solve problems as far downstream as we possibly can because we're lazy. We're lazy, and as you said, we want to
Yeah.
we just want to go about our lives and be left alone, and that's fine. But that's not how it works. With every right you have, there's a responsibility attached to it, and we've abdicated our responsibility. And it's the toxic empathy stuff is like, well, you heard it from the mayor of Seattle the other day. Some guy commits 6 or 7 crimes. Well, I don't know what his childhood was like. Like my childhood wasn't very good. From what you say, yours wasn't terrific either. You know what I didn't do today is commit a litany of crimes as a result of that. You know what I mean?
I think what we need to do on that, and I've been having this argument with the mayor of the city of Seattle, and by the way, he's actually better than some of the ones that have come before him, but which is a whole different conversation. But look, the point is, yeah, it does. I do want to get at root causes. All right, and I think that's fine. You want to put people in the best possible position to succeed, which means you want a supportive community. But at the end of the day, you are responsible for the decisions that you make. Period. Full stop. No matter what put you in that position, as you said, there's 1,000 people who went through similar stuff, and most of them made the right decision. And also if you teach people that they are not responsible for the decisions they make, then society is out of control because people are like, hey, I can do whatever the fuck I feel like doing, and it's fine. No, you have to teach. Yeah, I'm going to help you. I am, but you have to be responsible for the decisions that you make. And we've lost track of that. And I think, yeah, no, just the conversation has gotten too partisan is the wrong word, too totalitarian in its approach. Everyone wants to talk about their rights. No one wants to talk about their responsibilities, and you got to talk about both. And that's right and left that fall in.
Yeah, it's just mental laziness. I want to pivot because we're
Yeah,
getting
yeah, yeah.
close to time here. I want to pivot into the military stuff. You were the chair of the House Armed Forces Committee. Now you're ranking member
Yeah.
for the Democrats. We've got some problems that need to be addressed that aren't being talked about publicly right now. Hegseth is dealing with the barracks. That's been a problem since forever. I don't know. I was in the 82nd Airborne, and I think our 4th Brigade had their barracks were flooded. They would just flood randomly from time to time. There's mold all over the place. This is back in the early 2000s, by the way. But I just did a story a couple of weeks ago about Camp Lejeune and toxic exposure from the 80s, and a guy I know has cancer from it now. A lot of people apparently do. So that stuff's getting talked about, dealt with, etc., and I'm glad to hear that. But I think there's a much larger problem with our military and veteran community, and it's one that's pervasive throughout the entire male population in the United States. And that is that the average 21-year-old's testosterone today is the same as their grandfathers in 2000. We have seen a precipitous drop in testosterone rates, and it's no shock to see that young men are going crazy right now. Let's be real clear about that. More and more of them are just dipping their toes into nihilism. Just the meme, the trope of living in your mom's basement with no career, no future, and all this stuff. Hate women, all this stuff. It's a very odd thing. It's very odd, but I think a large part of it is driven by a lack of attention paid to our hormones. And I've seen it in some primary research that some friends of mine conducted. So I think they looked at I think it was 400 veterans who expressed suicidal ideation or attempts, and 83% of them had like significantly low testosterone, like in the 1 to 200s range, where it should be in the 7 to 900 at minimum range for a person of their age. And I've pushed this in every possible direction I can, VA secretary, people in Congress, all this stuff, and literally no traction on it for some reason. And I don't understand why, because it's a very easy problem to solve. The
What's
test.
the cause, do you think?
Well, the causes and the causes are One, I think it's doing less manly shit. Like nature works that way, evolution works that way, and it
Yeah.
happens very
I,
quickly sometimes. So wild pigs are the best example. They'll start to lose their tusk in domestication, and their teeth will grow back within one generation, sometimes 3 generations fully regrown tusk, just from being introduced back into the wild. So part of it is environmental, like that. A lot of it is toxic exposure to heavy metals and plastics, and then head injuries, which is why you see it more in the firefighter, military veteran community than anywhere else, because they experience more head injuries and more toxic exposure. So that
absolutely.
that to me tracks as reasonable because of, and still that's correlation and not causation. We would have to study it, but I'm not as concerned with the cause as I am with how easy it is to fix. I've had plenty of experience with this. We can talk about it with my co-host on Drinking Bros next, after
Yeah.
we do this show. He's never been in the military, but had the same issues. He was at a very happy point in his life and just felt a sense of impending doom and suicidal ideation all the time, and he couldn't figure out why. And finally, he told me about it. I'm like, look, go to the doctor and get your hormone levels checked. I guarantee you that's what it is. And he did, and he was in the low twos. And over the next 3 to 6 months, he got it fixed, and now he's happy. Right?
Is it just a matter of medication?
It's very easy. Yeah. Sometimes it's lifestyle changes. Sometimes it's
Got it.
medication. Sometimes it's both. And then over time you can gradually reduce the amount of medication as well. So it's a variable price model that reduces over time. So this is something that we can solve right now, this veteran suicide epidemic. And by the way, inside the military, for active duty people, the largest growing cohort of suicidal ideation and attempts are among people that have never deployed to combat before. So it isn't post traumatic stress. Okay, it's a hardware problem, not a software problem, in my opinion. And this is something that has to get. It should be something that people are deeply concerned about. I know they are. We talk about veteran suicide all the time, 22 a day and all this stuff. And people make attempts to do this stuff. We stood up the 988 line. There's all kinds of stuff that's happened as a result. A lot of charities and such, some of which I've worked with. But this is, to me, the easiest thing to do is to go find a group of veterans somewhere. I'm sure a scientist knows more about how to do a proper study than I do, but test them. Like, have people that 1,000 people who are not suicidal and 1,000 people who express suicidal ideation, test their testosterone levels and see what it's going on. Or an
I'll
active
be
duty
happy to
military
do that.
unit.
I confess, and I, had a lot of conversations about veteran suicide, a lot
Mm,
of treatments. As I said, I went through, a bunch
mm,
of psychiatrists, psychologists, and different stuff. And there's really promising therapy now that focuses on dealing with trauma in a way that can sort of rewire your brain. But I had not heard the test. I'm aware of the low T issue.
mm.
I listen to sports radio, so I hear a lot of ads. But I had not heard the direct connection to suicide and
Yeah,
those issues.
yeah. Well, think
I'll
about
be
it.
happy to talk
Think
to the
it, think
military
about it
about
this way.
it.
Men and women are on different hormonal cycles. A woman's on a 28-day cycle, and a man is on a 24-hour cycle, right? So if you've talked in depth to anybody, and you've probably experienced this yourself if you went through that situation, the suicidal ideation is something that sits in the back of your brain. You don't really think about it, and then in a moment of high anxiety, stress, or
Yeah,
crisis, in the matter of 5 to 15 minutes, you make a decision and kill yourself. That's how it usually works, right? Well, that's
absolutely.
that's how it happens for men, because we're at a 24-hour hormonal cycle. It goes like this over the course of 24 hours. For women, it's longer. It's 28 days, which is why there's a couple of days in there where they're just upset at me mostly. No, just kidding. But yeah, it's different for men and women. It's good to understand that. But for men, when
Yeah.
you understand biologically what's happening, it makes a lot of sense that this would be a precipitating factor. And you know, again, I've been barking about this for 5 to 10 years now. It's hard to keep track, but very little traction on it. And I think it's easily solvable. The test for testosterone is pretty cheap, and then testosterone itself is also pretty cheap. Um, And I don't understand why an organization like the VA, which doesn't have funding problems, sometimes people will say it has funding problems. That's never the problem. It's an efficiency problem.
Yeah, no, I have a large VA hospital in
Mm,
the middle of my district in Seattle and worked with those
mm,
challenges. So yeah, no, we've passed a lot of increased funding.
mm.
That's really fascinating. No, will certainly take a look at that and see what the Department of Defense has to say and how we can prompt them on that issue.
Yeah, that would be great. And I'm also, the last thing that I wanted to ask you about is the majority Democrats. Are you familiar with that organization? I mentioned it before.
Yeah. Mentioned, I know Jake, and there's a
Mm,
bunch of different people are looking for ways to say, how can we get past the normal partisan stuff and
mm.
just focus on solving problems? And we got a lot of good members, last two, three elections, who Democrats who I think are focused on that. And Jake's certainly a leader of that.
Well, let's break some of the stereotypes for a moment before we get out of here.
Sure.
Uh, who are some other members of, and don't feel bad about leaving people out because there's too many
Yeah.
to name, but you're not going to remember 200 people. But, who are some other Democratic members of Congress that people on the right should pay attention to that are just reasonable people, aside from yourself and Jake?
Well, in the Senate, there's several. Ruben Gallego and Mark Kelly.
Well, Ruben is on majority Democrats, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ruben's a good friend. He was on
Mm,
the Armed Services Committee when I was
mm,
chair. I worked with him. I've known, well, Gabby Giffords was my best friend in Congress when we served together. So got to know her, got to know Mark Kelly, very reasonable guy. Pat Ryan, who I'm sure you probably also know,
mm.
is probably my favorite newish member of Congress, also on the Armed Services Committee. Incredibly reasonable, smart person. I like Alyssa Slotkin, also served with her. Really tough, smart, tenacious person. Gosh, there's a whole host of people here. Trying to think about who else. A lot of pretty much any Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee for the most part, I worked with really well. So yeah, I think there's a lot of reasonable folks out there. I also like Jonah Goose, member of our leadership from Colorado, reasonable guy who I've worked with a lot. Just trying to think of my conversations that I've had. Sarah Elfrith is a new member
Mm.
from Maryland, also on the Armed Services Committee. Really smart, capable. We've been working together on a number of issues. So, I mean, what I would say to your listeners is reach out to your member of Congress. Have a conversation with them. Don't
Mm.
just look at their Twitter feed. Don't just, see what they're saying because a whole lot of stuff gets cranked out there. I think if you sit down and talk with people, if you give people a chance to be reasonable, about 75% of the time they are.
Mm. Yeah.
Okay. Not always, I've had those conversations that go sideways, but by and large, if you reach out to people and say, hey, let's just have a conversation, you'll be stunned at the number of, well, it's like your dog thing,
Mm.
you know, pull
Yeah.
back the fence, look at each other and start talking. You'd be surprised at how many reasonable people there are out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, the analogy. Well, first, I do like Pat Ryan, but he's an officer, so I have to dislike and distrust him just off the bat.
Fair
But
enough.
yeah, the analogy I like to use is that when you're very close, you can whisper to one another. You get a little farther away, and you start to talk out loud, and you get even farther away, and you have to yell, and then eventually you get so far away that the only thing you can reach each other with is bullets and bombs, and that's unreasonable and untenable for a republic as such. And it's all of our responsibility to make sure that that shit doesn't happen. It really irritates me, the inflammatory language from the left that's precipitated some violence, in my opinion, and then the constant discussion of civil war amongst the right as if there's clear battle lines between this group and that group. I mean, it's just the dumbest shit that I've ever heard. And by the way, most of the people talking about that are in no way prepared for war of any sort.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Reagan said it best when the heckler said, "Make love, not war." He said, "You don't look like you're prepared to do either." Um, I think that's a good way to cover that. Is there anything else you would like to share with our audience before we get out of here?
No, I think that's good. I mean, that's really what I want. I mean, I think we need to do a lot more of this and just have the conversations. I really appreciate the way you've done the interviews. And I've always, my entire career, doesn't matter, far right, far left, you want to talk to me, let's talk. You know, I go on Newsmax, News Nation, Fox, whoever I talk to, and 90% of the time it's good. Every once in a while, I mean, last time I was on Tucker Carlson's show, he just basically talked over me and yelled at me for 6 minutes. But by and large, you know, it turns into a decent dialogue, and we make progress as we're supposed to do as Americans. So I just appreciate you giving me the chance.
Sure. Yeah. Carl Higby's a good buddy of mine. If you want sometime, we can go up to his property in Connecticut and blow shit up and shoot things if you're into that sort of thing. I don't know how you feel about that, but we're big fans. So
All right, that's cool. All right, well, I look forward to that opportunity.
yes, sir. And thank you for coming today. I really appreciate the time. Tell people where they can reach out to you.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's always an embarrassing thing. My staff usually takes care of that. Just Google me, Adam Smith.
Go to
You
the
can find,
house.gov.
yeah, house.gov
Yeah, it's
stuff. Yeah. I
slash.
always forget, I always forget exactly what my email address is. But yeah, no, I'm not hard to find.
Yeah,
I'm
great.
also Instagram, Twitter, you know, Blue Sky, all that, or I guess X. So,
And then
yeah.
at Rep Adam Smith on Twitter X. If you can't spell those words, then I can't help you, my friend. Thank you for coming today. I really appreciate the time.
Keep it simple. Thank you very much. I appreciate it as well.
Yes, sir. And thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.